2020 has been a challenging year.
Times are already tough for me, and then they just got even tougher.
From the COVID-19 pandemic.
In my opinion, having a bad test is actually worse than not having a test at all.
To historic, raging wildfires.
There's fire on both sides of the road.
That seem to explode overnight.
How close to the road is it? We're still trying to wake some people up and get them out of here.
And misleading claims and falsehoods filling your social media feeds.
Facebook primes them for engaging with that content and sharing it, and then it just takes on a life of its own.
We've been there every step of the way, telling your stories and uncovering the truth.
From KGW News, this is KGW Investigates.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Cristin Severence.
And I'm Kyle Iboshi. Together we make up KGW Investigates. And like you, we spent 2020 working remotely or socially distanced.
There was no shortage of stories. So tonight we're going to look back at some of our investigations in 2020, starting with the story that impacted probably everyone, COVID.
It really has affected our lives in so many ways. Kids are out of the classroom. Many restaurants and businesses have closed. We've all felt the economic impact in one way or another. At a time when people are struggling.
The coronavirus pandemic has left millions of Americans out of work. And just this
crisis, there's the huge economic toll on American families.
Stunning evidence of an economy that suddenly hit a brick wall.
Private debt collectors are garnishing wages. They're taking money out of people's paychecks when they can least afford it.
For them to start garnishing during a time when people are really, truly struggling, it's ridiculous.
Dina MacGyver was living paycheck to paycheck before the pandemic hit. Now, the Beaverton woman is in danger of not being able to make rent after a private debt collector started garnishing her wages. In July, Ray Klein Inc., or Professional Credit Service, started taking about 20% of Dina's paycheck. It was a significant hit, especially after her work hours had been cut during the pandemic.
I'm already pinching pennies to get by, and now I get to pinch them even more. I hope I like ramen noodles.
The debt is from nearly 10 years ago, when Dina got treatment at Providence Portland Medical Center. Over the past decade, she'd lost track of how much she owed, moved a couple of times, and says she never heard from Providence again. At some point, Providence, one of the country's largest and richest hospital chains, referred Dina's old medical bills to Ray Klein.
The thing is this debt is more than 10 years old.
Garnishments can happen after a debt collector or creditor files a small claim and gets a judgment against someone who owes them money. Some people aren't even aware of the court proceedings because they haven't been informed. When they don't show up, a judge can issue a default, allowing the debt collector to go ahead and take a portion of their wages.
I haven't seen a single letter from them or a phone call or even, anything, an email, anything to just say, hey, can you pay us? Can we work this thing out? I could have had it paid off years ago if I knew about it.
Phil White had long forgotten about his old medical bills from Providence, Portland. He'd since moved to Sacramento. But in June, a debt collector suddenly started garnishing his wages.
Times are already tough for me, and then they just got even tougher.
Despite various protections for people struggling to pay student loans, mortgages, or rent during the coronavirus pandemic, only a handful of states have stopped debt collectors from moving ahead with wage garnishments, and many of those protections have now been rescinded. In Oregon, there's no special help for indebted consumers during the pandemic. Instead, it's business as usual for debt collectors. A review of court records found since April, there have been more than 500 judgments in Multnomah County alone, allowing the garnishment of wages.
We're looking at a big ding out of every paycheck that I get.
The collection agency, Ray Klein, deferred to Providence for comment. In a written statement, a Providence spokesperson said, Providence's goal is to avoid sending any account to collections, and we have steps built in to provide multiple opportunities for patients to work along with us to resolve or eliminate account balances. Additionally, Providence said during the pandemic, it has asked the collection agencies it works with, including Ray Klein, to implement immediate action such as ceasing to charge interest, postponing litigation proceedings, and deferring payment plans. But despite that request, Ray Klein still filed court papers for garnishment of wages against Dina in July, right in the middle of a pandemic. She's since moved out of her apartment and moved in with her brother. The garnishment of wages can be crippling, especially for those barely getting by during a pandemic. This story is part of an ongoing series called The Cost of Collections. We looked at the aggressive tactics used by government, businesses, and debt collectors to get people to pay up.
Testing and access to COVID tests continues to be a big issue. That's why so many people are interested in at-home COVID tests. We did an in-depth look at the pros, the cons, and if you should take your safety into your own hands.
Tonight, the coronavirus skyrocketing to new records. And now
the surge in COVID cases in Oregon, Washington, and across the country has people on edge. Testing is more important now than ever. So when an Oregon company in viral tech emailed offering to send an at-home COVID surface test, I said yes. Businesses use the kit to test high-traffic areas to try and detect COVID before an outbreak. The email from EnviralTech also spurred me to start researching other at-home COVID tests, from the companies, the cost, and effectiveness. These tests are for people, not businesses, and there are a lot of them. The FDA just authorized the first at-home rapid COVID test. You administer the test on yourself at home and get results on the spot in 30 minutes. But that won't be available nationwide until the spring. So what's available right now? Currently, there are 9 companies allowed to sell at-home testing kits by the FDA. They cost between $109 and $155. They use a nasal swab or saliva collection method. You have to fill out a short questionnaire before getting the test delivered to your home, and you have to send the test back to a lab for results. I asked KGW medical expert Dr. Pyle Coley for her take.
What are your thoughts on these, at-home COVID tests?
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that testing needs to be more widespread and more accessible. And that's the huge advantage of these at-home tests, is that they really do bring testing to the person's bedside. But the flip side of the coin is that the tests have to be accurate. And in my opinion, having a bad test is actually worse than not having a test at all.
While the labs claim high accuracy, Dr. Coley points out all of the tests were given emergency FDA authorization, which is different than full FDA approval, meaning the tests did not go through the same rigorous review. She said the collection process could also be an issue.
So specifically for the self-collection kits, you have to put that swab in there, and there are rules given by the CDC as to how long it has to sit in there, how much you have to swirl it around, how far in you have to get it. So all of that is highly dependent on the person who's collecting the sample, and it could very easily have a false negative if somebody doesn't collect their sample appropriately.
We ordered 2 of the at-home tests to see how the process worked. Both used nasal swabs, and both had how-to videos on their website you could watch before taking the test. I ordered the Pixel test on a Thursday. It came mid-morning Friday and cost $119. The instructions were easy. I did my best with the swab and sealed everything up to be sent. The Everlywell test cost $109. I ordered on a Thursday, and it came Friday around 6 in the evening. Both companies said you should take the test and send it out on the same day, and you should not put the kits in a FedEx or UPS box over the weekend. I waited and took both tests on Monday. The Everlywell instructions were a little more involved. For this test, they said to tilt your head back for the nasal swab. You also had to break off the handle of the swab before putting it in the tube and sealing it up. I sent both kits off to be tested in a lab.
I watched a video, but I've never done this before. Does that concern you that, all of these people are ordering tests and then having to do them on themselves?
It does concern me. And I think if we are going to shift from testing from, public health societies and hospitals to at home, which plausibly we could do, then we do need a public health campaign to educate people as to what the correct way to do it is. Just like we did with educating people about how to wear masks and educating people about how to wash their hands.
I got my Pixel results late Tuesday. I tested negative for COVID. The Everlywell results didn't arrive until Thursday. I was also negative. But with the cost and time it takes to get the test and wait for results, I wondered who the tests were meant for. Health experts say there are two patient populations the at-home test may work for: patients in rural areas without access to testing sites, or high-risk patients who want to be tested without leaving their homes.
I can really see this testing kit playing a niche role in that type of patient population.
As for the EnviralTech surface test, the Oregon company who emailed me and kicked off this whole story, I received 8 swabs and 8 tubes. We tested keypads, doorknobs, and other surfaces all over the station and sent that off the same day. Companies like nursing homes use the swabs to see if COVID is on a surface before an outbreak is detected. We received the results late the next day. Every place we swabbed tested negative for COVID.
None of the surfaces that you've collected samples from showed any signs of COVID. So that's a good thing.
Exactly. So that's what you want, correct?
Of course. I mean, of course, you were looking to not have COVID present in your facilities, although we work with a lot of long-term care and senior care facilities. So a positive test, we don't want to see it, but it's helpful because it tells them that they need to take more precautions. Maybe they need to identify who it is who's shedding virus and remove them from the facility, do more cleaning and disinfecting, and that sort of thing.
The bottom line with all these at-home COVID tests, just because you test negative doesn't mean you don't have COVID.
We saw this with President Trump, who is being tested daily. So the negative test today just means there's not enough virus to trigger positivity. It does not mean that there's no virus at all and that you're safe.
Meaning if you get COVID and get tested on the same day, you'll most likely test negative. People should not be using these tests as a way to justify having a large gathering, not wearing masks, or not social distancing.
Coming up, it smoldered for a month, then exploded overnight. How the Beachy Creek fire became one of the worst and most destructive ever in Oregon. KGW Investigates continues next. If you have a story for our investigative team, email investigators@kgw.com or call our tip line at 503-226-5041.
From KGW News, this is KGW Investigates.
Welcome back. 2020 has been a challenging year. First, the coronavirus pandemic, then those historic wildfires this summer. We used open source data to find out how a relatively small fire, smoldering in the Oregon wilderness for weeks, turned into one of the most devastating fires in state history.
And it's all around us. There's nowhere here that doesn't have fire. Wind about 60 miles an hour, pushing it toward us. We have no idea how Idana or the Strait are. But at this time, they're probably all the way burnt up. This is all we have here.
Fueled by extreme winds, the Beachy Creek fire exploded. Walls of fire and smoke raced through the Sandy Am Canyon. Police and firefighters dodged falling trees and boulders on Highway 22 to help get everyone out of the mountains.
There's fire on both sides of the road, and I don't know at what point the trees are going to start falling on it.
It was a frantic escape, and not everyone survived. The Beachy Creek fire had been smoldering in a remote part of the wilderness for weeks. So how did a 10-acre fire become one of the most destructive wildfires in Oregon history? We analyzed satellite images, photos, video, incident reports, weather forecast, and first responder radio traffic.
Multiple spot fires.
To reconstruct how this wildfire simply erupted. On the morning of August 16th, a small plume of smoke could be seen in the Opal Creek wilderness, 75 miles east of Salem. The Beachy Creek fire burned 10 acres. Fire officials listed the cause as unknown, although a lightning storm had started several other fires across the Cascade Range. Time-lapse video showed a column of smoke from the Beachy Creek fire, which was burning on a steep mountainside, making it nearly impossible for fire teams to access on foot. Instead, helicopters dumped water, and crews worked to create a fire line, hoping the Beachy Creek would eventually burn itself out by fall. This stubborn fire remained relatively quiet through August. Images from early September showed the smoke. The smoldering Beachy Creek fire grew very slowly in the hot, dry conditions. Then, everything changed. As the Labor Day weekend came to an end, the winds started to roar.
There's Piety Island there in the middle of Detroit Lake. Got about 30 civilians here.
Overnight on September 7th, the Beachy Creek fire and another huge fire to the east, the Lion's Head, exploded. The two wildfires started to merge as they charged up mountainsides and across ridgelines, pushing west towards Highway 22. Small communities like Detroit, Gates, and Mill City stood right in their path.
Just letting you know it's still coming down the hill towards Detroit.
The National Weather Service had warned for days about extremely critical fire risk due to hot weather, followed by strong winds. Forecasters described the early September weather pattern as something that occurs only 2 to 4 times a century, explaining the wind event is literally off the charts for this time of year. As a precaution, some level 2 evacuation orders were already in place. But the powerful gusts, clocked at more than 50 miles per hour, created another problem. Officials say downed power lines started nearly a dozen spot fires along Highway 22.
Be advised, OSP stating that power lines are coming down near Mill City.
Per OSP, Highway 22 at 7th Avenue in Mill City, power lines are down across the road for those coming and going.
I copy that.
The spot fires spread quickly, energizing what now had become a mega fire. Suddenly, flames surrounded small mountain communities. Firefighters and sheriff's deputies went door to door.
How close to the road is it? We're still trying to wake some people up and get them out of here.
The Beachy Creek fire would become one of the largest blazes in state history. Satellite images show the path of destruction. The lakeside resort town of Detroit before, then after. And the neighboring community of Gates, seen here. What started as a small fire in a remote part of the wilderness would scorch nearly 200,000 acres and decimate thousands of homes and buildings in its path. At least 5 people lost their lives. Fire crews estimate the Beachy Creek will continue to smolder into winter, and recovery in the Santiam Canyon will take much, much longer. And our investigations into those devastating wildfires didn't stop there. We brought about change. A cable company reversed course after we called them out for charging wildfire victims for equipment lost in the fires.
Coming up, online misinformation is everywhere right now. So how do you separate fact from fiction when you're scrolling through your Facebook feed? KGW Investigates continues after this. If you have a story for our investigative team, email investigators@kgw.com or call our tip line at 503-226-5041.
From KGW News, this is KGW Investigates.
Another big storyline of 2020, misinformation, disinformation, and social media. We saw it firsthand during the Oregon wildfires when thousands of people posted the false rumor that Antifa started the wildfires. They didn't. I talked with a disinformation expert who believes these rumors start and grow in private Facebook groups.
So it's something that I had been on the lookout for.
Oregon State Representative Julie Fahey knows about misinformation.
So a couple months ago, I heard about a tactic of some folks online to create fake accounts to join, to really micro-target neighborhood groups or smaller community groups on Facebook.
In August, when the wildfires were burning across Oregon, someone new joined Fahey's neighborhood Facebook group of a couple hundred people. His name was Mike. He lived in Eugene, and immediately he started posting wrong information about the fires. He said, quote, "I saw a recording from the Oregon Attorney General who says, 'Watch your neighborhood. Protesters are out lighting fires now.' He said the news is covering it up." The account was fake, and there were some red flags, like the punctuation mistakes and the fact that the Oregon AG is a woman. The neighbors reported Mike's account, and it was taken down. During the wildfires, we saw several online rumors lead to real-world actions. People who refused to leave their homes during evacuation orders, citing rumors that Antifa was in the area. The Clackamas County Sheriff said that was not true. Armed men even set up illegal checkpoints to stop people in these areas. And sheriff's departments begged people to stop inundating 911 operators with false rumors about Antifa arrests. There were none. Representative Fahey points to another incident in July. A rumor started on Facebook that Antifa was coming to take down the cross at the New Hope Christian College in Eugene. In response, 100 people, many of them armed, showed up to protect the cross. Antifa members did not show up. It was a bogus threat.
And the moderator of the Facebook group said that right before the incident, there was an influx of people joining the group.
Facebook groups have been called hubs of misinformation and conspiracy theories. Nina Jankowicz, who studies disinformation at the Wilson Center, wrote an op-ed in Wired that Facebook groups are destroying America. She said in 2016, as Facebook pivoted from a digital public square to more of a digital living room, the popularity of private Facebook groups exploded. The private nature helps people feel more comfortable sharing information and believing what's posted in those groups.
What I like to say is the most engaging content on Facebook is often the most enraging content. And the emotional stuff and these communities that are centered around that emotion, again, provide this prime attack surface for anybody who wants to spread disinformation. And they don't even have to invest in advertising or bots and trolls in authentic accounts in order to spread it. They just drop it in the group. And again, Facebook primes them for engaging with that content and sharing it, and then it just takes on a life of its own.
She said it's very easy for bad actors to infiltrate private groups and spread misinformation. The more we're aware and skeptical, the better. Check the source of the article, the date, and the author before you share it.
Another good indication is if you find yourself getting really emotional in response to a piece of content, that should set off your spidey signals, spidey sense, I guess, for you to take a step back and start doing these checks of like, is this a real news outlet?
Facebook has said they do monitor these private groups, but experts say they could do more. They should hire people and not rely on algorithms to really fight this problem. We could not do these stories without you.
Your voice matters, and we want to hear from you. If something appears to be wrong or unfair, contact us and we'll look into it. Email investigators@kgw.com or call our tip line at 503-226-5041.
We look forward to hearing from you.